Hello and welcome to episode 11 of The Racer's Edge, coming to you in association with F1 Racing Magazine in the build-up to the Monaco Grand Prix, that showpiece of Formula One. We'll have Martin Whitmarsh, team principal of Vodafone McLaren Mercedes, on the show very shortly. But before then, a few matters of moment that have arisen since last week's show, namely the Pirelli situation, and nobody better with whom to speak about that than the editor-in-chief of F1 Racing Magazine, Anthony Rowlinson. And slightly confusing situation now with Pirelli. What's your take on the latest announcement from Italy?
Well, it seems that the FIA have come down pretty hard on Pirelli's side, if you like, actually backed Pirelli and said that there can be no changes to the tyres this year that are performance enhancing. So any changes must only be safety enhancing. And it seems from what we understand behind the scenes, Pirelli were getting pushed very, very hard to make performance related changes and announced that they would. At which point the FIA appear to have stepped in and said, no, you can't. So as things stand, the rest of the season we're going to have these high degrading tyres, which will be much to the annoyance of Red Bull, I'm sure. And I'm sure Eric Boullier in the Lotus camp will be very, very happy that things are remaining the way they are.
And Eric Boullier in the Lotus camp actually surprisingly opinionated in the pre-Monaco press releases they put out, which are normally fairly predictable. But in all of them, Alan Permain, Eric himself, saying very frustrating, this was in the course of the news last week, very frustrating that these changes were being made, they'd adapted the car to them, they'd done right amount of testing. I mean, Pirelli are actually saying they need a lot more testing. We need to test in better venues next year, warmer venues, obviously, perhaps have more test miles as well. But Lotus actually saying it is what it is, and we got on with it. There is this talk, however, about the construction change, possibly, from metal back to Kevlar, for safety reasons maybe, to stop the delamination as a result of debris on the track. And whether that will have any effect on performance, of course, is another matter. Indeed, if that change is going to be made at all. What's your understanding now of that?
It looks as if that will happen. It's hard to say until we see the tyres on the cars, whether that will have any change to perhaps the feel of the car. The tyres might feel different, therefore the setup might change, and that could have a knock-on effect on performance, but that will be an incidental effect rather than the intention of the change. So I think we'll have to wait and see what happens in practice session to actually find out what the effect would be of that.
Just talking about Monaco, Anthony, very brilliant new issue of the magazine, actually. I'm not just saying it because this show's in association, but it's a really good issue. It's a great read already. I haven't got all the way through it. But I love some of the stats that have come out in the Monaco Grand Prix preview section, which was along the lines of 4,290 gear changes. Doesn't mean that much these days, of course, with the gear shift system. But I love this one, 130 movements to the steering wheel per lap.
Per lap, yeah.
Does that include opposite lock and flicking over blind brows through Casino Square?
I imagine if that happens, it's probably 132, 133, isn't it? And,
Great stuff. And I've got to congratulate you on your interview with Nico Rosberg. It's a little bit like the interview we're about to show you with Martin Whitmarsh, because it involves lots of questions from you, the fans. But I love the way you handle this one with Nico, because within about 3 minutes of the interview, he says, "Are you going to ask me all these questions from all these cards down here?" And you say,
"Yes."
And that's good stuff. That's what we need, I think. These drivers being whipped into shape and told to do what they're supposed to do and get on with it.
Nico, I have to say, he was good value, because these, you ask the question formats that we have, they are genuine readers' questions. That's the whole point. Sometimes if you get a driver who's just not in the mood, they can be really difficult because you've got to plough on regardless. But Nico, to his credit, he played ball and he gave us some really good fun answers.
And I love this one. This is from Helen Penman in the UK. "Do you miss Michael?" And Nico's answer is, this is a very good answer. He says, "I wouldn't want to answer that in any way." Yeah. And that's actually much better than a politician's answer of saying no comment, isn't it? I mean, it's just like, that says everything that needs to be said about that answer. And lots of good stuff. Do you ever dream of moving to Ferrari? Have you tried to grow a moustache the same way as your dad?
That was quite a funny answer, because he said he did actually, but it only lasted a day.
And I love this long question from Richard Forth in the UK. "With your cars having a highly developed Frick suspension system, does this mean we're going to see Mercedes win a lot of races this year?" Reply from Nico, "What's Frick?"
Absolutely.
No, good stuff. I love that. And lots of good reading there. But we're going to go through that in detail next week, probably with Stuart Codling in the studio here, which would be good. But now let's let's talk to Martin Whitmarsh. We did so in the context of what we're going to be doing now on the Racer's Edge, which is to work very closely. I say work. We're going to be rubbing shoulders with and inviting you, the members of the F1 Racing Global fan community, to submit questions prior to specific episodes of the show. If you've already enrolled, you'll know what that is all about, and you will know that from time to time, regular intervals, you will be invited to submit questions to some of our featured interview subjects here on the Racer's Edge. And you'll also know that from time to time, we, the panel, will select winners who ask the best questions, make the most interesting comments, provoke the most interesting answers, and the prize will be a Casio watch. We have 3 we're going to announce on the show today, all questions related to Martin Whitmarsh. But if you haven't yet joined the F1 Racing Global fan community, go to this link now and do so. Equally, open a copy of the magazine and you'll see how to do it. It's a great thing. It doesn't cost any money. It keeps you updated, not only with the magazine, but also with the show and with F1 events in general. Anyway, Martin Whitmarsh, and your questions to him. This is how it went. Well, I'm delighted to be not only at the McLaren Technology Centre, always a treat to drive there. You get a little bit of adrenaline rush as you get to Woking and you see the signs. But I'm delighted to have a little bit of time with Martin Whitmarsh this morning at the MTC. Preparations for Monaco well underway. We've got lots of questions, Martin. Before we get on to those, I just want to get my 2 in. And the first is, well, first of all, to say congratulations on the Honda deal. And can we have a few details about it? How long has that been in the melting pot? And big question for me, exclusivity or not in terms of engine supply?
Okay. Well, firstly, it's been around for a little while. Frankly, we've been talking to a number of automotive companies. I mean, for us and our business model, you need proper full OEM support, and I think that's important. It's important for us. It's also important for Formula One. If you look back over the last 60 years, who have been the consistent backers, supporters, investors in Formula One, then automotive companies have been that. We've peaked at, I think, 7 or 8 automotives in Formula One at any one point. It's dropped down to 3, so to get Honda back in is great news. One, because it's Honda, and their passion for Formula One is extreme. So I think that's extremely positive news. And for us, then it was important. Having said that, of course, at the moment we've got now this year and next year with a very long-term partner, Mercedes-Benz. So of course I'm excited about the future, but I've got to be loyal to our current partner. We'll be very focused on doing the best possible job we can, both in the rest of this year, which of course looks challenging for us, and next year, before 2015 moving to Honda. Regarding exclusivity, then we had the opportunity in the early days of having exclusivity. I think that's the wrong thing for the sport. I think it's very tempting to wear a McLaren hat and try and covet and retain, but I think the right thing for any automotive manufacturer is to be involved with 1 or 2 other teams, as well as perhaps the primary works team, McLaren. So that's something that will happen in due course, and I think is healthy for Formula One.
When you say in due course, can you confirm that in year 1, other teams will be running the Honda engine as well?
I can confirm the contrary. So that's why in due course. I mean, it's very tough for Honda now to prepare for 2015. The new engine regulations have a lot of challenge, not just on the internal combustion engine, but also on all of the ERS, the energy recovery systems that are around that. They're very complex in the new rules. So they've asked in the first year if they can just concentrate on us, which we concur with. But it's beyond that, 2016 and beyond, that potentially we'll see some other teams that are using a Honda engine.
Was there not a rule at one point, though, that if a manufacturer was going to come in, they had to do more than one team? Or was it they have to be able to supply more than one team? How actually does that work?
No, there used to be a rule on engine manufacturers not being allowed to supply more than 3 teams without without specific permission. I think the rule you're thinking about is the tyre manufacturers. When we used to have a tyre war and multiple suppliers, then there were obligations on a tyre supplier to provide. I think if it were 2 manufacturers, if you were called upon to do so, you had to be willing to provide 60%. If there were 3, I think you had to be willing to provide up to 40%. But there's never been a regulation that's required an automotive manufacturer to provide engines to more than one team. It was almost the inverse of that, strangely.
Where will the engines be developed and built?
The engines will be primarily developed and built in Japan. Clearly there'll be some operations and coordination with McLaren here in Europe, but this is Honda R&D, a very racing culture anyway. They want to, and rightly so, design, develop the engine close to their core business, to where their facilities are and where their principal people reside.
Martin, and I'm starting to paraphrase some of the questions that are coming in, obviously related to this year's car. A question that I have is that we could say McLaren are looking at a new wind tunnel and perhaps there's an issue aerodynamically on calibration, perhaps. But Ferrari have been using the Toyota tunnel as well, I think, and their downforce levels look pretty good.
No, I think no one here is pointing at wind tunnels and blaming wind tunnels. I think we haven't done a good enough job. We expect to be a front-running team. The margins, the disaster that we're faced at the moment is a 1% performance differentiation. So it's actually, in percentage terms, relatively small. In Formula One terms, that's night and day, of course. So, but the bottom line is we haven't done a good enough job. We've made some mistakes. We've got to recover from that. Recovering from that in a very competitive environment isn't easy. But we don't enjoy where we are at the moment, and that's why we've got to be very focused, fix the problem. No one's going to do it for us. There's lots of pundits who give their views. I've never noted them to come and help us particularly. So I think we've got to go out there, fix the issues, which we intend to do, and get back to competitiveness as quickly as we can.
And Monaco coming up this weekend. Right, with no further ado, let's get on to some of your questions. Amazingly, and thank you very much, everyone, for this. We've had, as I speak, 488 questions to Martin, and there are more coming in. And we're going to sort of just pluck them at random, I think, would probably be the simplest thing. It might be fun for Martin to do this as well. So I don't want to answer that one, but... Well, here's Graham, Chris Grabham from the United Kingdom. How do you cope with the pressure, I think he means this personally, Martin, of not delivering a title as a McLaren team principal? And he's a little bit presumptuous there that you're not going to win the championship this year, but what's the pressure like for you from a personal standpoint?
No, well, I think, people ask about pressure. There's pressure from outside, from the media and whatever. To be honest, I'm not that worried about that. I've been fortunate enough to been involved with McLaren for quite a few years. I've been involved in personally in over 100 Grand Prix victories and a few World Championships. You'll never, you're only as good as your last race. So at the moment we're struggling, and that's very evident. But I think you've got to be focused on what are you going to do about it, how are you going to get back, how are you going to fight for every Grand Prix win, and that's what I focus on. So I don't spend that much time sort of philosophizing on what might have been, what has been, and how we got here. I think it's important that you just focus on, right, what are we going to do? If we're competitive, 6 months ago we had the fastest Formula One car out there. Today we haven't by a reasonable margin. So, that's irksome, that's frustrating. But the pressure that we put on ourselves is much higher actually than you get from any outside external source. So, I don't enjoy going to a race weekend without the real and tangible belief that you can win that race, and that's something that we're very focused on. And it's not easy, but you've got to look forward, got to just find those improvements, and believe that we can get back, which I do.
Well, having said that, of course, this weekend's race is the Monaco Grand Prix. In the Richter scale of enjoyment, that is one of the shop window races in Formula One. I would imagine personally it's quite an enjoyable race, but knowing that you're going to be struggling probably, I don't want to say that in advance, but who knows. But it's not. But do you feel differently going into this Monaco, not having a car that's been winning races?
Yeah, you feel a little bit different, but I think what you think about is, okay, if I was, let's say, I was 1% off or 0.9% off in the last race, then I want to be closer. I want to make some progress. Now, this is a circuit where the drivers feel they can make a big contribution, which clearly they can, but at the same time, the car's got to be good. It's a very different circuit to, for instance, the extreme of Barcelona where we've just been. It's a circuit which has all sorts of challenging camber. It's got lots of slow speed corners. It's got a lot of challenge for the driver. But to be frankly, you go there thinking, well, we'll find a little bit of incremental performance. You don't go there foolishly think, well, we're suddenly going to be competitive, but you still go there thinking, well, anything can happen. It's a circuit. We've had very wet Monacos that are chaos. We've had all sorts of unusual events. We've seen that tyres have created lots of different challenges. So, inevitably, there's a bit of you that wants to go there and win, regardless of your recent form. And we'll see. I think it's, it has a lot of attention drawn upon it. It's a very unique place. It logistically is not a straightforward place to operate, as you know, but there's something quite special about it, certainly.
Carlos Jalife, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, from Mexico. Just on that subject, do you have a deadline to focus your efforts into the 2014 car? In other words, a cut-off point on this car?
Not yet. I mean, maybe that time will come. I mean, we've been in the past quite poor, I'd say, on that, in that we struggle to give up. I struggle to give up. And the idea, as many teams have done, that as early as halfway through the year, they stop development work on a current car, they focus their resources on the year ahead. And that's a very rational process, but it's not one that I've been very good at in the past. So we'll see what happens. At the moment, we're fighting to regain our competitiveness and very much working hard to do that.
David Hawley from the United States. This is an old chestnut of mine as well. Would you like to see a third car on Fridays, testing rookies, bringing more chances, more running for the fans, etc., etc.?
Yeah, McLaren recently made a proposal in the last sporting working group to say, why don't we allow, in fact, an extra session, have the first session of the weekend, where you're only allowed each team one car. You've got to have a rookie driver. I think it'd be quite an interesting thing with the lack of in-season testing. It would help that. It would perhaps make some teams, more able to take young drivers into the team. So, personally, I'd like to see it. It would be entertaining, it'd be interesting. I guess it would be frustrating when that rookie driver sticks it in the Armco, which will happen, of course. But that's one of the challenges of the sport.
Speaking of that, well, perhaps or not, Makoto Yamanuka from Japan. Are you thinking perhaps of having a Japanese driver in the future?
Well, I was talking to our colleagues at Honda last week about this, of course. They'd love to see one, but first of all, they want to win. And therefore, I think it isn't going to happen anytime soon. I think the challenge that you have, and we were talking to our new colleagues at Honda, you've got to really bring a young driver over from Japan, probably to Europe, to get involved in the international karting, because it's very difficult otherwise to launch a career development that leads to Formula One. So it's a big undertaking, and finding the right talent where there isn't as developer feeder series in Japan at the moment as perhaps there are in countries such as this or other European countries. So it's a challenge, but I think it's something that clearly there will one day be a very competitive Japanese Formula One driver.
Yeah, but having said that, Kamui Kobayashi was doing a pretty good job. He did a pretty good job over the last couple of years, and most people in Formula One loved him and thought he was a breath of fresh air in terms of his approach.
Yeah, I think there's a difference, though, between loving drivers and the drivers being good enough to be world champion. What McLaren and Honda would be interested in is drivers that are capable of being world champions. So, it's nice if you like the driver, but it's much better if they're capable of being a world champion.
David Heron from the United Kingdom, what is the most emotional moment you've personally experienced in your career in Formula One? Good question.
Yeah, it is. Well, there's lots. I mean, one of the great things about this sport is, I mean, there's technical challenge, there's sporting challenge, there's political challenge and intrigue and all sorts of things. And I've been doing it now, I think, 24 years. So, you know, obviously winning some world championships with people like Mika, that was because I knew Mika from 92 up until 98, 99 when he was winning world championships. Probably 2007 Canada, I went to the podium, which I don't often do. It was Lewis's first ever Grand Prix victory. Obviously I'd known Lewis since he was a young teenager. And I remember just before I got onto the podium, suddenly realising the other two drivers, and you're a much better anorak on these things than me, but the other two drivers on the podium in 2007 Canada were Nick Heidfeld and Alexander Wurz. Both young drivers who I'd been involved with also personally. And I remember the four of us hugging before we went up onto the podium. And it was quite a big emotional moment because suddenly to be confronted with, you know, if you like, three young friends, three young drivers that you'd been involved with their career maybe helped a little bit. And obviously it was Lewis's first ever Grand Prix win. So that was pretty emotional. But fortunately you have a few. That's the nice thing about the sport. They're not always positive emotional moments. They can also be disastrous emotional moments as well.
Yes, you can say that again. Motor racing full of ups and downs. A question about when you took the decision to do a different car for 2013, bearing in mind how good the car was in 2012.
Well, those sorts of decisions happen June, July. So in fairness to then Paddy Lowe and the team, you're looking at a different point in the season where you make those decisions. I think ambition drove the decisions. Ambition is a good thing in Formula One. It's what drives you to make a range of decisions. And by the time at the end of the year, we won the last two races. We obviously had a very competitive car. We were very strongly committed. We could have changed course, but you believe in what you're doing until you've got data to prove otherwise. And by that point, we were, we'd committed. We can look back. I don't spend a huge amount of time on hindsight or regret because I think that's a negative set of emotions. But those decisions were made sometime before the end of the year.
That question from David Galvin. Sean Wilshire from the United Kingdom. How do you balance work and home life?
Well, I think Peter, and I'm a rarity in Formula One in that my wife travels to all Grand Prix. So my children are now grown up. I'm sure I was not the most present parents when they were growing up, and I think that helps balance it for me. There are very few people who travel to all the Grand Prix that travel with their wife all the time. I happen to. So there's a balance. I mean, you just have to accept it's part of your life. Last year, I was in the UK for 5 weekends. So you get used to travelling.
There's a question here from Jason Cahill, United Kingdom again. In a recently published Formula One Racing magazine article, you mentioned that all teams come across businesses that would like to enter the sport for Formula One sponsorship, but perhaps at a rate card that some of the top teams wouldn't support. I was surprised to hear this. Can you give us a bit of an overview of where we're at in terms of sponsorship, where the sports economy is placed relative perhaps to other sports and its global exposure?
Well, again, the world since 2008 has been a very different place and a very difficult place. Advertising has been challenged. We are, we think of ourselves as a technology business. We're a business at, the pinnacle of motorsport, the most technically advanced sport in the world, and that's how we consider ourselves. But actually, we're a part of the advertising sector. We all rely upon the brand exposure that we generate to create those revenues. And I think we've we've got to go out and demonstrate a good return to these investors. There's no now, it's changed since in the last 25 years, go back that far. You had, if you like, fairly either passionate or egocentric CEOs and chairmen that wanted to go into Formula One, and they decide this is a good thing to do. Now it's a much more rational business process. It's much more scrutiny that it goes through, much more thorough due diligence. So it's a tougher ask now, and you've got to find companies, brands, products, services that have worldwide exposure and therefore can truly leverage it. We're very fortunate we can demonstrate with our long-term partners that they're getting a great return on their investment. If we didn't, frankly, they wouldn't be here. They're not here for the love of it. They're here because we can demonstrate that return. And so it's a challenge, but it's I think now the sport, the world, there are hints of recovery around the world. America's sort of frankly coming out of this recession quicker than Europe, but Asia, South America have been pushing ahead as well. So, we've got to look out into those markets as Europe is a difficult market. We know now, we sell products as well, obviously through our road car business. We know Europe is a quieter place than we'd like it to be.
Where are we at, Martin, with reducing costs in Formula One, though, under that heading of generating sponsorship? We know that the new engine regulations are expensive. If you're a major partner, such as yourselves, that's okay, but there are other teams going to have to be buying engines at full price, expensive engines. At the same time, where are we at with the resource restriction agreement?
Well, I think the resource restriction agreement gets a lot of coverage and creates a lot of concern. The fact is, we've taken a number of measures that have certainly reduced costs, and we've made taken good strides with the aerodynamic restrictions, be it CFD restrictions, wind tunnel restrictions, which have formed part of RRA. They've been positive. Some other areas have been tough, and people have pushed back, fought, argued, or some people have been concerned that they've been fully executed. Overall, it was there was some success. We're good at Formula One at highlighting the failures. We've had successes and failures, but we've had some of those. The engine regulations undoubtedly are a big challenge for Formula One at the moment because, on the one hand, we have to accept that those of us who have been around Formula One love large, normally aspirated, ultra-high revving engines. They sound phenomenal. They've been tremendously exciting. We were up at one point, if you recall, at 21,000 RPM. We used to love it. We love it, don't we? Being around it. You then but I think we have to look back and say, or look at where we are and say, what is the social relevance? Where else are they've got large capacity, normally aspirated, ultra-high revving engines? And the answer is nowhere else. We're that only place on the planet that's using them. So, is that sustainable? The answer is probably not. So, understandably, not everyone's happy, but we've chosen in Formula One, with the leadership of the FIA, to go for downsize, direct injection, turbocharging, all the things that are relevant to the needs of society. The traditionalists don't like it, worried about the sound, worried about those things. I think that as an initiative was absolutely the right thing to do. What we failed to do, I'm going to say we, Formula One, is control the cost of that change. So, a worry for the sport at the moment is that those engines are going to cost a lot of money. There are some teams, McLaren's in a very comfortable position, and so some of the other big teams. But we've got to really ensure that we can get to a point where all 11 teams in Formula One have got a sustainable business model, and that's under threat at the moment. So the answer is we've got to go back, try harder, and keep pushing. You're never, there's such creative people, and it's so competitive in Formula One. You can't come up with a plan and just execute it, and money is saved because we're very good at inventing ways to spend more money to get a competitive edge. And it's a continuous process. And some progress has been made. There have been some failures along the way. We've got to keep working hard on that.
I know you've got to go now, Martin, so one final question, and I'll throw in a yes or no at the end of it. Kevin Hart, I don't think he's any relation to Lee Hart, actually, from the United Kingdom. You said that colour blindness creates difficulties for you in reading weather details. What is your personal coping mechanising system? And my final question is, and I'm quoting another one from here, is will McLaren ever go back to orange? That's the final yes or no answer, I guess.
Well, I'll answer the last one first. I mean, possibly, but I mean, we're racing in orange in GT a little bit now, and it's a historic car. It's a great colour, but probably not in the short term in Formula One, unfortunately. My own colour blindness. Yeah, no, I am colourblind, and I think this came out.
What do you think of this green tie I'm wearing, Martin?
Yeah, no, I get a few of those jokes, but I mean, 1 in 7 males it's a male affliction, as you may or may not know. 1 in 7 males are colourblind. Most people who are colourblind don't know. Those of us who aspired to be fighter pilots many years ago found out along the way that we were colourblind. And I make a joke of it in this company, and I made a joke of it one day when someone asked me about. I think there was no cars running on the circuit. I was sat on the pit wall, and I think it was anyone sat there, and I was looking at the weather radar, and someone came up to ask the question. Not about my colourblindness, but about weather radars. So I gave them a very boring dissertation for about 5 minutes on Doppler shift radar, weather radar systems. Realised boring myself, so to make it a bit lighter, I then quipped, I don't know why I'm looking at this because I'm completely colourblind. But yeah, I am colourblind, and it's as you know, in fact, you can see individual colours. It's actually, sadly, it's a brain malfunction that when colours are in close association, your ability to discern them. So yes, I although I do look at the weather radar, I then ask someone, is this what I think it is? It's my coping mechanism.
Well, of course, there was a McLaren driver who was colourblind, and it was in the days when we had green and red lights. The red lights didn't go out, and his name was Andrea de Cesaris, and he did actually jump quite a few stars, but there you go.
Colourblindness is often blamed for lots of things at traffic lights. I try and use that one myself, but you can individually see colours.
Martin, great pleasure talking to you as ever. Best of luck. But not luck. I mean, luck doesn't exist. Everything is a cause and a reason for everything, I guess. But hope things go well for you in Monaco this weekend. Lots of fans out there. And thank you, the fans, for asking all these questions. Sorry we didn't get through to all 488 of them. We got through about 5, but we could talk for hours. But it's a busy time here at McLaren as they prepare for Monaco. Again, thank you very much, Martin. Thank you.
Martin Whitmarsh in good form, actually, given the amount of stress and pressure the guy's under a lot. I mean, and we didn't talk to him about the hidden politics of Ron Dennis. I didn't think it was appropriate at the time. But nonetheless, head screwed on sort of guy. And when you talk to him, you feel, with Martin and a few others, Domenicali, Christian, Formula One's in pretty good hands in terms of the future. Interesting, we caught me slightly unawares when he was saying, no, Peter, you're wrong. There's no ruling at all about what an engine manufacturer can do coming into the sport, and I was confusing it with tyres. Interestingly, one of my heroes, Johnny Noble, was also making the same point, and I only spoke to him after that interview and saw what he'd written on autosport.com. But I think there is a certain amount of confusion, certainly, over what is the ruling or the understanding there, because, I mean, what's yours, Ant, in terms of what a new engine supplier can do?
Well, I always thought the position was, without ever having checked this, that any supplier that came in had to be in a position to supply more than one team, so that you couldn't come in as a sole supplier. Now, evidently that may not be the case, but there appears to be a bit of a grey area at the moment.
It is. It certainly doesn't say that in the 2013 regulations, but we haven't yet seen the 2014 regulations. And certainly there was talk about that as a rule or an agreement several years ago. So actually I spoke to Frank Williams relatively recently, and he was also confused and said that they were going to get their lawyers to look into the situation. So it's not exactly clear cut. And I understand that Jonathan Neal has meanwhile said, at McLaren, has also said that it's his understanding too. So watch this space. I think if you're McLaren and you're Martin Whitmarsh, you are going to want to be exclusive with Honda for as long as you possibly can. There's no question about that. Exclusivity with an engine supplier like that is nirvana, particularly if they've got a year to develop the engine. It's not as if they're just being rushed into it and they're racing next year.
mistakes that other people make.
Exactly, and it'll be interesting to see, I mean, in these days of simulation and what they can do on test benches, it'll be interesting to see how ready to run that engine is in 2015. But you could argue that watching the other manufacturers make mistakes and do what they're doing in 14 actually is quite a big advantage for them. So add that plus exclusivity with McLaren, it's quite a big thing. And then there's to the backdrop, of course, to the whole business of the Renault engines being more expensive than some of the midfield, back of the grid teams want to pay, a lot more expensive than the current engines. And we covered that a little bit in the interview in terms of the cost and where it's going. It's all got the makings of it ain't stopping here. It's going to run this one.
Well, today's rumour, of course, is that BMW will come back. And I guess that's an obvious thing to be out there. But there could be a little sea change again. Manufacturers drifting back into the sport in the way that they didn't drift out of the sport. They left with their tails between their legs, didn't they, a couple of years ago? But
they did, and I think it's interesting again to see how that works out, because we know Jean Todt he's certainly more pro sports cars and other forms of motorsport, including rallying, than perhaps Max Mosley was. And we know that the policy before was to get as many manufacturers into Formula One as possible. So it's interesting to see how, again, that pans out in terms of how many manufacturers Formula One continues to attract, and indeed what Jean Todt is going to be doing in other forms of motorsport. Formula E, bit in the news now, the whole electric thing is starting to gather pace, some good people behind that. We'll be talking about that in some future shows, but a lovely looking little car that has been produced, rendering produced very nicely.
And they sound pretty good too, actually, such as you can tell from the web clips that we're getting. They've got this sort of quite high-pitched whine, but it's quite cool in a sort of Tron kind of way. You know?
They do. Well, we were talking about it earlier, and if it is too quiet, of course, what they could do is put music in, and each team can have different music, national music coming out instead of the noise of the engine. There's a different one for you. Anyway, let's go back to some of the biggest problem, and thank you again, everybody who sent in questions, the biggest problem when we're doing this is getting through all the questions. And of course, it was not going to be possible to get through 480 odd questions. We only got through just scratching the surface. But some of the other questions, and Anthony, you've been through them as I have, that attracted your attention. There was one here, Ian Walding actually said it as it is. Why not go back to last year's car? I didn't put that to Martin Whitmarsh. I think he kind of covered that when he was asked when did they start this year's car and why did they make the change? But it's a difficult one, isn't it? We have had that happen in the past, of course.
It's not as simple as it seems either, because they'd have to re-crash test the new chassis and their new slightly different front wing regs, and it's not simple as just put the old car on track. It's a pretty hefty undertaking, and even a team like McLaren's got finite resource. You can't just sort of do these things without there being a serious knock-on effect on all your other programs, and evidently McLaren have chosen not to do it because it seems like they think it's the wrong thing and they'd rather proceed with this car and try to make it a winner.
There was one question there, and I saw you looking a bit surprised when we heard it, which was, would you ever consider a Japanese driver? And I suggested Kamui, and he was quite dismissive of Kamui as a driver that effectively could never win a world championship. I was a bit disappointed with that, actually.
I think it's a bit harsh. I mean, perhaps Kamui didn't show obvious world champion potential, but he on the strength of that drive in Suzuka last year, he's a clear podium finisher, aggressive driver, lots of overtaking skill, kept Sergio very honest, who's someone that McLaren have picked as a world champion contender, you would have to say, but by their own logic. And who knows, if Honda make it compelling enough for McLaren to have a Japanese driver, then who knows what will happen in a year's time.
You like this question from Wendy Murray, Mrs. Wendy Murray. Which racetrack gives you the biggest thrill? Because you like sort of simple questions like that. I do. Again, we didn't have a chance to put that to him. But what do you think Martin would have said?
He'd probably say something very McLaren, like, the one that we last won on. But I don't know. I expect it to be the usual suspects like Suzuka or Spa. But that would be a good question to put to him, just to see what he says.
Well, why don't we do that? We'll go to Monaco and we'll put a few questions in, because there's a couple of others here that we've since seen quite good. Mr. David Thomas, United Kingdom. Have you ever, or would you ever try to entice Adrian Newey back to Vodafone McLaren Mercedes? Another quite good question. Not sure I would have put that to Martin, actually, because I think I know what the answer would have been, but we can speculate, of course, can't we?
Well, if not McLaren, I think if I were the team principal of another team struggling for performance, I would make it the number one thing I would try to do, however impossible it may seem, however too expensive he would be for your budget. I mean, what nearer thing is there to a magic bullet than Adrian Newey in Formula One? It'd be interesting to see what Red Bull will come up with in terms of making sure he didn't leave. That would be the biggest package ever offered in Formula One, wouldn't it?
We talked about that last week. Potentially, maybe that's why James Allison's currently on the list. Maybe he's being lined up by Red Bull. We don't know. We'll find out hopefully sooner rather than later. Mr. Neil Craig says, "Oh, Honda, do you remember the days of the Earth Dreams car?" Again, I didn't mention that to Martin either. Yeah. That has to be one of the most bizarre sponsorship programs of all time, isn't it?
I think Honda just sort of
2008.
They really lost the plot at that point because they'd gone from being a pretty successful engine supplier to a pretty good team, BAR. And then it all just went a bit wrong when they started being a manufacturer. Well, a bit wrong. It was disastrous. 07, 08 were two of the worst seasons on record, and they pulled the plug too fast because 2009 the Brawn chassis was a World Championship winning car. Not with a Honda engine though, with a Mercedes engine.
But the sponsorship was the thing that got me because, it's great to save the world, but from the start they said this is going to encourage a lot of companies who also want to save the world to spend a lot of money with the team. And I don't recall that happening at all.
No, I think it was ill-conceived.
Yeah.
That's the fairest thing you can say.
I'm sure in fact, as we saw in that interview, Martin didn't rule out the prospect of McLaren going back to orange or having some orange on the car. Wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah.
Attila Bekefi from England. People are saying that Jenson Button is not strong enough leader for the team as Lewis was, and could that be a reason why things are difficult now? I know you're going to have an opinion about that, Anthony.
Yeah, I wonder whether with Jenson it's not so much leadership, it's the fact that he has such a particular setup, so many particular setup requirements, and whereas a driver like Lewis would always give you that elusive quality of being able to drive a car as fast as it'll go on a given day. Jenson doesn't give you that, so it's going to be more complicated for McLaren's engineers to work out exactly what the problem is, and I think they will struggle to develop the car around that.
And another question about the fastest McLaren driver over one lap. This is from David McDonough. An interesting question. He cites Kimi and Lewis as drivers at the time. Sorry, Mika, Kimi and Lewis as drivers at the time. We all considered to be the fastest driver over one lap. And the question to Martin would have been, who do you think was the quickest or is the quickest? So we'll put that to him at Monaco as well.
What a shootout that would be. Whoa, one lap. Kimi versus Mika versus Lewis. That'd be great.
In identical cars, all on one new set of super softs.
Yeah.
Around which circuit?
Spa.
Well, one time at Spa and then at Monaco. I think we'd have them both, wouldn't we?
Aggregate timing.
Yeah, that would be that'd be very impressive. But the question is, what do we think Martin would say there?
I think he'd go for Mika.
Yes, and I think Martin definitely has that emotional streak to him. And that comes over in the interview, and it wouldn't surprise me if he went for Mika, just for emotional, sentimental reasons. Now, the time has come to announce the three winners that the panel, the editorial panel, have asked the most interesting questions this week to Martin Whitmarsh. And we have three, so it's not first, second, and third, they're three equal winners. So the first winner is from the United States, Daniel Hawley, who asked that question about would Martin like to see a third car available on Fridays for testing rookies, comeback chances, etc., etc. So congratulations to you, Daniel. Good question and a good answer from Martin too, I think. No question that many people in Formula One would like to see that. But it's kind of difficult to make it happen. But good to hear more discussion about that because we, the fans, would love to see it happen. I think you would too, right?
That'd be great, yeah.
Right, and then I think we selected Jason Cale, also from the United Kingdom, who put the question to Martin. In the recently published F1 Racing magazine, you mentioned that all teams come across businesses that would like to enter the sport for Formula One sponsorship, but are finding it difficult to do so because of the way Formula One is beginning to price itself out of the market. Now, that's a really hot topic, of course, but it was a well-structured question, I think, and a good answer from Martin got him going, and that's really what Martin is very, very good at, talking about the economy, the Formula One economy in general, and where we're going, and how the Formula One economy should govern its future as well. I think he did very well there. So congratulations to you. And then finally to Kevin Hart, also from the UK, and he asked a question about the colour blindness. So that kind of, I didn't know about that. I don't think you knew about it either. And good on Martin for talking about that and having a good laugh with us. So congratulations to all three of you. You'll be getting notifications via email as to how to pick up your prizes, but it will be one of these brilliant Casio Edifice watches and You'll enjoy that, I'm sure. Congratulations. We won't be doing this every week, but we will be doing it at regular intervals. So stay in touch with us through the F1 Racing global fan community to ensure that you know when next we're going to be asking questions like this. Now, Ant, one thing that I also loved in the current edition was talking about Kimi Räikkönen, was Kimi's just general approach to racing. There's quite a lot of Kimi stuff in there. And I noticed in the press release for Monaco, he's quoted as saying, I understand that there are quite a lot of parties and stuff going on at Monaco, but I don't really know much about that. Yeah, right, Kimi. But I hear that Kimi is going to be wearing, again, under that heading, he's going to be wearing a James Hunt helmet this weekend.
Fantastic.
Isn't that going to be good?
Yep.
And that really shows a side of Kimi, I think, that if you dig deep, this guy does love his motorsport in every dimension. And he did that James Hunt thing not last year, not because somebody just said, oh, Kimi, why don't you do this? It'll be fun. He for sure knows a lot about James, and he can understand James's ethos of racing. Very like Kimi's, very, very serious pro when it came down to it, and did the job beautifully. But equally loved his life, enjoyed his life, and enjoyed probably the Monaco weekend more than any other. Although James didn't have a great record at Monaco, and in his championship year, 76, I remember James actually, he was stuck in traffic. The car wasn't great. McLaren were going through a slight mini slump, and he was stuck in traffic, and he went off in a big way at Tabac. I remember chatting to him after the race and saying, James, what happened? He said, oh, I just got bored. I went droning around Monaco, nothing to do. I just lost concentration, went off. What do you expect? I was like, well, sorry I asked, James. Brilliant stuff. Now, Anthony, you have, we have behind us here a photograph to die for. And there are going to be several of these at Monaco this weekend. This is the front cover of F1 Racing with all the champions since the magazine started in 1996. All signed by the world champions. And I think there are going to be 8 of these signed photographs presented over the course of the Monaco weekend. Some of them going to a brilliant home, going to an event that is going to auction them for charity. Some going to, all of them, the drivers are going to get one each, and the drivers are basically going to do whatever they like with them. But say when Kimi, you're going to be there when Kimi's presented with his, and Kimi may well then decide to auction it for charity. And this specific one is the F1 Racing Haymarket one, and this potentially is going to go on eBay or maybe the McLaren Autosport Awards at the end of the year auction. We'll keep you posted as what happens there. But tell us a little bit more about this picture. And
well, we put it together for our 200th issue, which was September last year. Quite a landmark for the mag, obviously. And through a bit of magazine cunning, we shot all 9 champions that have been world champion in the magazine's lifespan. So Damon in '96, right through to reigning triple champ Sebastian Vettel. And we've created this unique image, and we have each of their signatures on it, and it really is quite something, and it's impossible to replicate as well. They are unique, other than reprinting them, and obviously only we can reprint them, but they've been very well received.
Who else is going to receive one apart from each of the drivers?
Bernie, Eddie Jordan, who'll auction it for his own charity, and
which is Click Sargent,
exactly.
Named after Sir Malcolm Sargent of the Royal Choral Society.
And there are 1 or 2 others whose names escape me at this moment, but
Pirelli.
I believe so, yes, because they sponsored the magazine when we had the cover with the gatefold cover treatment. They took out a big ad at the back, so
and then on the back it's
we paid a little gratitude there.
You actually get an Anthony Rowlinson signature as well.
You do, certificate of authenticity.
Well, that's brilliant. And I know Michael Schumacher's just taken delivery of his, I understand. And Mika will be down at Monaco for sure, won't he? Damon's looking a bit glum in that picture.
Maybe we just got him at a bad moment.
Nah, that's the look, isn't it? That's the look of the front cover as well. That's the
mean and moody.
That's the Nico Rosberg, Lewis Hamilton look. You can't smile anymore on a front cover.
Well, for this one, I mean, I was at both the photographs, and Nico, actually, we had to say to him, put your race face on, because he was having quite a good time, and he was smiling, he was quite happy. He said, come on, put your race face on, and he did. Lewis slips into race face mode quite easily. It's sort of default mode for pictures.
Okay, sadly that's all we have time for this week. My thanks to Anthony Rowlinson, Editor-in-Chief of F1 Racing. We'll be back again next week as we look back at the Monaco Grand Prix with the Deputy Editor of F1 Racing, Stuart Codling. We'll go through this month's edition in a little bit more detail, and of course we'll be reflecting on the race with some of the key players from the weekend. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, to follow us on Twitter, and to register or subscribe, whatever word you like, to our YouTube channel. That way you will be kept up to date with all the new content. And it's not only this show you can see on the YouTube channel, there's plenty of other content as well. And on my blog, and some of the videos find their way onto YouTube, you will see the ongoing saga of Jim Clark's 1963 season. Now, Anthony, I know you're an expert here. Jimmy's just qualified at Indy 50 years ago. He's on the second row. He's a rookie. How do you think he's going to go in the race? And he's got Monaco to do in between.
Well, sitting alongside a world authority on Jim Clark,
Not at all.
I'd say Jimmy probably does quite well. Maybe second. Could have won, perhaps.
Guess who's been reading up on the issue? And thanks for joining us. And don't forget to see us next week, 7 o'clock Wednesday, usual time. See you then.